You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today, Senator Jim Banks, Hoosier through and through, but he's representing us out in Washington, D.C., and he's very kind enough to join us. I know you're busy, Senator Banks. Thank you.
Hey, it's an honor. I've been following the show and been following your work for a long time. We've known each other for years, not well, but it's been fun to watch this podcast take off. I had a podcast once too. Only my parents and people who hated me listened to it. So
there's a difference?
Some days. But what you've built here is something special, and I commend you for it. I'm honored to be a part of it.
You're too kind. I can only imagine how many requests there are for your time. But I will say that with your appearance, I have had every living United States senator on the podcast.
How about that?
I'm very lucky. You know, the Republicans are, Evan Bayh came on too, and so did Joe Donnelly. So, this isn't a Republican podcast per se. I'm a Republican.
Joe Donnelly is one of the nicest men I've ever met in politics. When I was in the House, we worked closely with his office. I don't know that I've had a working relationship with someone on the other side of the aisle as good and healthy of a one as I had with Senator Donnelly. So he's continued to do good things. We stay in touch. I now have the Senate seat that he occupied. This
Correct.
was the Senate seat that I've just taken on was the longtime Senator Lugar seat. So a lot of history, a big legacy. And then it was Senator Lugar got beat in the primary back in, 2012?
Right.
To Richard Murdoch. And then Congressman Donnelly at the time beat Richard Murdoch in the general election. Donnelly had the seat for 6 years, and now I succeeded now Governor Mike Braun in the seat. So we have a great legacy of Hoosier senators, and sometimes I feel like I don't fit in. I mean, I'm just a country boy from Northeast Indiana, small town, and Robert, I can't believe that I get this incredible opportunity to serve my whole state in the United States Senate in the way that I do. I don't take it lightly.
You actually led me to two of my first questions, and that is, besides the legacy of just damn good men, Joe Donnelly, Richard Lugar, Evan Bayh, Dan Coates, who's my first political experience was clipping articles for the Coates campaign in 92 for free for Bros McVeigh and Devin Anderson. But they said, no, you can eat. We'll take you places where you can eat, which I thought was an interesting compensation for an Army guy, right? Like they didn't bury the lead. We also have a terrific legacy of veterans in this state serving executive, legislative, and the list can go on and on. Joe Kernan, Richard Lugar, Todd Young,
Dan Quayle,
Dan Coates, Robert Orr. Again, the list goes on and on. Eric Holcomb.
Yes.
Before you were a senator, you joined the Naval Reserve. Is that correct?
I did. I did it later in life, and also sitting in the room is a longtime friend and mentor of mine, Chris Crabtree, who you know well. When I was a college student at Indiana University, I volunteered for then Congressman John Hosteller, who represented the Bloody 8th District. And Chris Crabtree ran the Bloomington district office for conservative Congressman John Hosteller. So you can imagine how much incoming fire that he got in the People's Republic of Bloomington running that office. And you mentioned it too. I was an unpaid summer intern for Chris Crabtree in that office, and I did like newspaper clippings. I'd cut. This was like 1999, so you'd like cut them out of the daily newspaper and Xerox copy them and fax them to Congressman Hostetler in the Washington, D.C. office. And that was about the extent of my summer internship that I didn't get paid for. But I got to know Chris Crabtree, and at the time, Chris was serving in the Navy Reserve. So he and another guy who you mentioned a little bit ago too, who also worked for John Hostetler, Eric Holcomb, had just come home from his stint serving in the U.S. Navy. And those two guys, more than anybody, influenced me to pursue a direct commission in the Navy Reserves, which is a unique way of serving your country, something that is a great avenue for people who have a graduate degree or have some professional experience who want to serve their country in uniform to do that a little bit later in life. So I was a state senator at the time when I got commissioned, and I got commissioned as a Navy Supply Corps officer. A lot of people, Robert, don't know this, but I was turned down by the Navy Reserve probably a half a dozen times before I finally got my commission.
Why?
It's a very competitive process. And I thought, like Chris Crabtree, Chris was a public affairs officer, and I thought because I was interested in politics, I thought maybe a political science degree at Indiana University, I thought public affairs would be a good avenue, but very competitive, a small community in the Navy. So I got turned down for that a few times. I looked at the intelligence community in the Navy. I really didn't belong there either. But then I became aware of the Supply Corps of the U.S. Navy, and it's an old term for it, but the Supply Corps is the logistics and business branch of the Navy. And at the time, I worked for a guy that you know, Jeff Hagerman, with Hagerman Construction. I worked for his family business, and it's a great Fort Wayne legacy commercial construction company, built a lot of beautiful buildings in Fort Wayne and now around the state. So I worked for a business. I was getting my MBA at the time from Grace College. I finally got picked up by the Navy Reserves to be a Supply Corps officer. Went through my initial Navy training and then my Supply Corps school in Newport, Rhode Island. And about right after I graduated the Supply Corps school in Rhode Island, I got my orders to go to Afghanistan. I took a leave of absence from the Indiana State Senate to go do that.
When were you there, may I ask?
Late. In fact, somebody told me last week I'm the most recently deployed United States Senator, because that was only 2014 and 15. So later in the war, when I came home from 2014 and 15, when I came home in the summer of 2015, then Congressman Marlin Stutzman was running for the U.S. Senate. He was defeated by the senior senator, my colleague and friend Todd Young, opening up the congressional seat. So I almost the day I came home and stepped a foot back in the United States coming home from Afghanistan, I ran for Congress, and as they say, the rest is history.
Let me correct myself. I said I have interviewed every living United States senator from Indiana. That is not true. I have not gotten Dan Quayle yet, even though I am fighting hard for it.
We'll help you. He's a great man, a great legacy.
I got to drive in a couple of his motorcades back in 1990 when I had just gotten out of the Army. The reason I mentioned Afghanistan is that my son did 2 tours as an 11 Bravo combat infantryman in the United States Army.
What year?
And one of the times was that year, and then there was a previous time. And I just have so much, when I used to write speeches, especially for Mike Pence, as the governor and having the National Guard and all that, and more than at the time, so this is 10 years ago, more than 2 million people had volunteered for service after 9/11. So I went in the Army from 87 to 90. It was the Cold War, but, not the same. But all those people who volunteered, especially for combat arms, where where you're going, our friend Chad Pittman being one of them, so many others. I just have a lot of respect for guys like you who said, you know what, I could end up over there, but that's just part of the deal.
Well, I got to an age around 30, starting a young family, where I had this sense that if I don't do it, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. My dad retired from a factory, and his dad, my grandpa Banks, World War II veteran. My mom's dad served in the Army after World War II, not a war veteran, but he served in the Army. So I had a legacy on both sides of my family. I don't know that my dad would say that he regrets that he didn't serve. My brother served in the Air Force, but I just had this sense that if I don't do it, I'm going to regret it. I was at that age where I was about to age out of being eligible to serve in uniform in the military. My time in the service in the Navy Reserves was very brief, but that moment of wearing the uniform, serving Afghanistan, the proudest moments of my life. I mean, there's nothing like it, to wake up every day and put on the uniform and serve my country. And I'll say, Robert, like coming home from that, running for Congress, I went to Washington. In the House, I served all 8 years on the House Armed Services Committee. Now I serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee. That brief experience that I had and deploying, going downrange, I was never in combat, but being in a war zone and experiencing that, I mean, it's given me such a strong perspective to go to Congress and serve in that capacity that I'll never regret. Very proud of it and grateful that I had that experience.
Nobody I've ever known, and in my 4 generations of my family, there are 15 veterans, including my mother, who was in the Marine Corps and was the first female Marine Corps recruit in Indianapolis after World War II.
Wow.
And my dad was in the Marine Corps. They met at Parris Island. So that household was sweet, just in case you wanted to know. I've never met anyone who regretted it. Even my son, who got injured and got hurt his back the second time. Mayor Ballard shaped his entire life, 23 years in the Marine Corps, and I've talked to a few people and they say, will you talk to my son? Or it's usually the son. He's thinking about joining, but he's not sure. Mm-hmm. And I have a few times, and one of the kind of my closing, argument, for lack of a better term, is I said, you know what? In 25 years, you're going to be at your daughter's or son's high school graduation. And he said, yeah. And I go, they're going to ask the veterans to stand, and you'll get to stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's being in those crowds, and especially in a state like Indiana where we are so pro-veteran. This state is so patriotic. That's exactly right. I mean, it's an experience. I'm so glad that I have Chris Crabtree again, who's sitting right here, is one of the main reasons. Eric Holcomb wrote a letter of recommendation for me to the Navy. So did Todd Young. Todd Young wrote a letter of recommendation to the Navy for me to get my commission, and that experience is something that I'm proud of, and maybe a better person, a better leader.
He was so generous to come on. He's one of my favorite public officials for many of the reasons that I tend to gravitate toward folks like you, like Senator Young, like Mayor Ballard, Eric Holcomb. You don't know if they're a United States Senator or they're running the Target at Southport Road. I mean, that's the part about it I like. That's something that's
authenticity.
Yeah. Joe Donnelly, mm-hmm. Andy Jacobs Jr., who I got to be really close friends with. Speaking of Marines, what is it about Indiana public officials, public servants, that are just so even-keeled and not about themselves? Because the legacy of there's also other people, John Day, Bill Crawford, here at the state level.
Yeah.
What is it about Indiana that produces those people?
I think it's not about the elected official. It's about the Hoosier voter who demands that type of authenticity. Hoosiers can see through it, right? They can smell the bullshit, and they're not going to put up with it. And I think you're onto something. That's the type of that's what Hoosier voters are looking for, Republican or Democrat. They can see through it. I found that on the campaign trail last year, campaigning statewide. I represented Northeast Indiana for 8 years and in the state Senate for 6 years before that. But when you travel the state, you realize that Hoosiers are pretty similar from Whitley County in Northeast Indiana to Posey County in Southwest Indiana. There's a true sense of that we're real people, and we expect real people to go to Washington to represent us.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies. Our guest today is Senator Jim Banks, and we are being supervised by Chris Crabtree. Chris needs to come up with, and I've said this before, he has eaten in more diners in more places in Indiana, and if he doesn't come up with a cookbook and all the money can go to the American Legion or whatever, we are missing out.
Well, Chris is a new grandfather. His grandson was just born over the weekend, so dedicated to a scholarship for him.
Yeah, congratulations, brother.
He's one of the funniest and wittiest people that you'll ever meet. He's
loyal.
He's worked for
loyal.
He's worked for worked for Becky Skillman, Mike Pence, Mike Soderl, John Hostetler. Now he's stuck with me. So, and he likes to tell people, be careful how you treat the interns, because I was his intern, and now he works for me and runs our field operation throughout the whole state. And we couldn't do it without him. But you really ought to have, he'll probably say no, but I'll force him to do it. You got to have him on the podcast.
I would love that, because I'll pair you up with a Democrat.
Ooh.
And then you can have fun, because some of the podcasts I've done, and they have been great. Jim Kittle and Ed Tracy together. Robin Winston and Mike McDaniel together. Kip 2 and Murray Clark. The list goes on. And it's a fun conversation. I'm going to post this coming week, so this is going to hit Monday. But Monday afternoon, with any luck, I'm going to be interviewing Leon Panetta.
Great.
Who I admire greatly for a lot of reasons. And he represents what is romanticized as the way politics used to be. I think that's completely false, but that's just my personal opinion. But do you get the sense, is there ever a part of you that was like, I wish I'd been around in the 60s when people drank bourbon together? Or is this whole sort of partisan Armageddon, you're in D.C. a lot, obviously, that's your job. Is it overrated? The whole argument that we just don't get along anymore and they hate each other and all that.
Well, you talk about Leon Panetta. His son, Jimmy, was in my freshman class when I got to the house, and we served together on the Armed Services Committee. Jimmy is probably one of the, I don't want to call him he's probably not a moderate Democrat, but he's a sensible Democrat that we've worked together on a lot of different issues. So it happens more than you think. Last week, a story's coming out tomorrow, by the time this podcast comes out, about a trip I took last week with Senator Ruben Gallego from Arizona. He and I served in the House together. Now we're in the same Senate freshman class, and he's an Iraq War veteran, comes from a working class background just like I do, 45 years old just like I am. And we went to Europe, and we have different perspectives on President Trump and Trump tariffs and a lot of issues, but we work closely together. So I think a lot of that is, the national media loves to sensationalize the divide in Washington, and I find this in the Senate more than I did in the House, and I can unpack it in a larger venue, but the Senate requires you to work with the other side. It takes 60 votes to pass something.
That's a great point.
And so you get, some of the strangest relationships I ever thought I would have when Elizabeth Warren is reaching out to me about we worked together last week. Sue Finkham, the new mayor of Carmel, reached out to me and said, we're having a problem buying fire trucks because all these private equity companies are buying up all the fire truck manufacturers. So now the fire trucks cost twice as much as they used to, and the delays are substantial. Elizabeth Warren's having the same issue in Massachusetts, and the two of us are beating up on the same. We found like the one issue that we can work on together. But that's how the U.S. Senate, it works that way, because the process demands that you work with the other side. Yeah, it's a battle. You go back to the founding of this great country, the greatest country in the history of the world, and it's always been a battle of ideas. But I find, back to Indiana, I think Indiana wants us to go to Washington and fight hard for Hoosier values, but sometimes that requires you to work with the other side. And in the Senate, I'm finding that that's easier to do than what it was in the House.
Let's pursue that just for one quick second. There is, and you're perfectly positioned to, in my view, to talk about this. There's the saying, the assertion. There's the Trump wing of the Republican Party, and then there's the Mitch Daniels wing. Do you buy that argument?
No, not at all. Mitch Daniels was a reformer. Remember when he came into, I was around for that. I mean, I was inspired by Mitch Daniels. I led a young Republican effort for Mitch Daniels for governor back in 2004. And if Governor Daniels were here, he would tell you about a major event that we hosted. That was a statewide event of young professionals who were saying, we want our state to succeed. We want to stay in our state instead of moving elsewhere. I mean, you were part of politics back at that point too. I mean, there was a generation of young Hoosiers who were saying that, this state has so much potential and can do better. And it took a reformer like Mitch Daniels to come in and completely shake up the way that business was done in Indianapolis. I later got elected to the state Senate when Mitch was still the for the last 2 years of the Governor Daniels term, and he never stopped. He was always pushing, right? Pushing new reforms, education reform, the leasing of the toll road, the daylight savings time in Indiana, issues that were one thing I learned from Mitch Daniels is at one point or another, he pissed off almost everybody in this. There was probably something that he did that pissed off every single Hoosier in the state. But by the end of his time in office, Hoosiers respected him for being that kind of leader, and his popularity was off the charts.
I was comms director at State Party in 2006 when we took that haircut. Hostetler lost, Sodrell lost, and Chicola lost, and we lost the Indiana House. There's no way you could have predicted that in 2008 he would have won in such a phenomenal landslide, much like yours when you ran for Senate last year. Is it
But I think President Trump is the same. He's cut from the same cloth in that way. I mean, he reminds us all the time privately, we have a short window of time to do a lot, and we are not going to waste a single day. And I've never been around anybody like President Trump who just never stops. He never stops working. Even when he's on the golf course, he's working. He's pushing senators. He's pushing the envelope because he understands it's just like Mitch Daniels did. We have a window of time, an opportunity to get things done, and I think there are probably more similarities between that reform-minded leader that Mitch Daniels was. Of course, there are disagreements between the two of them.
Little different communication style,
maybe, but they both like to shake it up.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to ask this question, and please forgive me. There was a chance you were going to run against Mitch Daniels for the Senate in 2024. A lot of people were hyping him because you had declared early. Are you glad that just didn't happen?
Yeah, of course. I have a lot of respect for Mitch, and in fact, before I got into the race, I called him. There were rumors about him running. Frankly, I never believed it because Mitch Daniels, what an incredible legacy in our state, and just as an incredible legacy at Purdue University, which is, as an IU grad, it's hard for me to accept sometimes, but Purdue is the cream of the crop. I mean, what they've done at Purdue, and Mung is a great friend, the new president, what they've done there is so tremendous. It's because of the foundation that Mitch Daniels laid to turn Purdue into what it is today. So I had so much respect for him, and I never bought it that he was seriously contemplating it. And I was also all in. I think, your podcast is about leadership, and one of the things I've learned in politics is that when you're in, you go all in. And when I felt like I was called to run for the United States Senate, to serve my country in a bigger way, to serve my entire state, I went all in and declared my candidacy. And Mitch Daniels' name was out there, rumored to be running, but I never thought that was very serious.
How hard is it in modern politics to preserve Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican?
Oh, I think it's simple, but there are times when I think you have to, you have to stand up for what you believe in. That doesn't mean that you crap on a fellow Republican. There are a lot of Republicans that I passionately disagree with, like Democrats. Sometimes my biggest gripes or disappointments are with Republicans more than I know where the Democrats are coming from, but sometimes I wish Republicans had more backbone, and I think I've tried to articulate this in the past in different venues, but kind of this new Republican Party, which I think is it is President Trump's Republican Party, but it's a Republican Party that represents the working class blue collar voters better than what the Republicans did in the past. And I think that's the moment that we're in. And by and large, most Republicans in Washington, D.C. are of that mold, a lot different than the Republican Party when I first got to Washington in 2017, which is more National Chamber of Commerce, corporate America, Wall Street driven. And I think the Republican Party today is much more Main Street focused on blue collar, working class people like my family, where I come from. My dad's retired from Dana Corporation in Fort Wayne. He was a union man through and through that made axles in the auto industry in Fort Wayne, which is very important to our neck of the woods. My dad was not a traditional Republican. I think he voted for more of a Reagan
Sure.
Democrat. NAFTA was a 4-letter word in my house when I was a kid. The only two politicians or candidates that my dad ever got excited about were Ross Perot.
In 92.
We had the Ross Perot for president bumper sticker on the truck, and Donald Trump. My dad was for Donald Trump the moment he came down the escalator. And I should have understood it then, but I didn't, because I argued with him. I said, Dad, this isn't for real. There's no way he can win. But my dad was so passionate about Donald Trump. He was that Union Democrat voter that switched sides and became a Trump Republican because Trump was the first candidate out there, aside from maybe Perot, but the first serious candidate out there that ever talked about being tough on China, that talked about fair trade deals for America, that put workers first, like my dad and the industry that he worked in, immigration policies that put American workers first. But that early Trump rhetoric on the campaign trail won my dad over from the moment Trump came down the escalator. My dad was right. I mean, he bought in early, and it took me a little time to come on board. But once I did, I recognized that our Republican Party is in a much stronger place, a healthier place today than it's ever been in my lifetime, because of that working class vote that's substantially come our way for the first time since Reagan, at least.
That's exactly right. And my father, who was a Teamster truck driver, would have been right next to your dad. Voted his job, and patriotism. So a lot of folks are complaining, criticizing the new direction of the Republican Party. It's clearly different than there was, like, say, when George W. Bush won in 2000, as you just articulated. Are you comfortable with the direction? Are you like, this is where we need to be now as a party?
This is where the Republican Party needs to be to win national elections moving forward. And President Trump proved that in the last election. A national mandate that won the popular vote. It's hard to argue with that. I mean, I wrote a memo to Kevin McCarthy right after Trump left office in 2021. And at that point, January 6th had just happened, and Republicans were kind of the post-Trump era. Trump was, kind of exiled to Mar-a-Lago, and Republicans were at that point, national Republican leaders were keeping a distance from President Trump, former President Trump at that time.
And they thought they could have DeSantis, which is Trump without the Trump.
Yeah. I mean, that came later, but This was immediately in the aftermath after President Trump leaving office. I wrote a memo to then Minority Leader McCarthy and said, if Republicans are serious about winning majorities and being a national party that can win the popular vote, we have to learn lessons from President Trump about how to keep the working class voters like my dad and my party. Because there was a debate at that point. It was Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney was like the arguing for going backwards to the old school Republican Party. And a lot of us were saying, no, wait a minute. We need to learn the secret sauce from President Trump. And it's the America First agenda that wins over blue collar voters. And that, to me, that makes all the sense, because that's where I come from. That's Indiana. Indiana's the top manufacturing state in the country per capita. We're the top steel producing state in the country. So these good, hardworking, blue collar, working class jobs that we have in Indiana, and those traditional Hoosier voters, if we're going to win elections, we need them to stay on our side. We can't go become the Wall Street party. We got to be the Main Street party of working families. And President Trump came back, wins the national popular vote, and proves that if we cement ourselves there, then we can be the majority party for a long time to come.
Obviously, I don't know Representative Cheney, but I would ask her, if she was on the podcast, if she were to appear, how do you explain the Republicans losing the popular vote in 92, 96, 2000, 2008, 2012, 2016, and 2020? That's not a party that is growing.
That's right.
Yeah. And Trump winning the popular vote in 24, to me, was the most important outcome of the race.
Yeah.
It changed the narrative of all the nonsense that went around in 16.
You look at the Democrat Party today they're wrestling with this. I mean, I just traveled for a week with a Democrat colleague, and they're trying to figure out, how do we win back these working class? Because that was their secret sauce. And something around the time of, I mean, this is the Trump dynamic. In the memo I wrote and gave to McCarthy, you can find it online, about cementing the Republican Party as a party of the working class. I went back and looked at, you look at mechanics and police officers and teachers and people who largely workers who make factory workers who make an hourly wage, and that giant shift from those voters voting Democrat to Republican coincided with another dynamic, and that's Wall Street donations. So go back to Romney versus Obama. Romney versus Obama, Wall Street donated something like 3-1 to Romney over Obama. Trump versus Biden, it was the exact opposite, almost 4-1. 4-1 Wall Street donations to Biden versus Trump. And it goes back to what's going on right now, the tariffs, being tough on China, telling China we're not going to let you steal our secrets, our intellectual property, steal our jobs. We're going to put serious tariffs on you and hold you accountable for what you're doing to our country. And the steel industry, they see this more than anywhere, the Chinese steel dumping and how they manipulate the steel markets and kill off our good-paying steelworker jobs in places like Indiana. So that Wall Street, now the Democrats are the Wall Street party and the Republicans are the working class party. And if we can keep it there, I don't know how Liz Cheney could. I don't know how she could see it any other way. But that's the equation of American politics that I hope to be a leader of that new party for a long time to come and keep our party centered in that place.
Well, to your point, and we'll move on after this. In my conversations with reporters or Democrats over lunch or whatever, I always ask the same question. You can call Trump every name you want in the book. I get that. But until you explain how Barack Obama won so handily in 12 and Trump won in the Electoral College by a comfortable margin, I don't hear you. Like, you have to explain that to me, and then you have to explain to me why it's my fault as a Republican. That's the part that I just, as a political science major at Indiana University, that's what I want to hear. That explanation. How did millions and millions of people who voted for Barack Obama, not once but twice, then turn and vote for Trump? Because clearly that dynamic saved Trump in 2016, without a doubt.
Yeah. And the dynamic is also, it's important to note, multiracial, multicultural. When Trump wins more of the black vote nationally than any Republican has in my lifetime.
Hispanic males.
The Hispanic vote by a bigger margin than what Republicans have won before. Asian American vote. What is the key ingredient? These are working class voters. So that's what unites them. And President Trump is focused on saving their jobs, making sure that, the tariff news in Indiana, we have a steady flow of good news in Indiana. The GM plant in Fort Wayne was the first announcement after Trump signed the tariffs into law. GM in Fort Wayne announces that they're increasing a few hundred part-time jobs and increasing overtime pay for their current employees. Then you had the Honda announcement. Honda says we're going to make the next generation Civic in Indiana instead of in Mexico. So keeping those good paying auto jobs. Then you have Eli Lilly say, because of the tariffs, we're going to bring back $27 billion of pharmaceutical manufacturing to the U.S. instead of in China, and start untangling this mess and getting that supply chain out of China and bring it back to the U.S. Indiana's going to benefit for it. Roche Diagnostics yesterday made a huge announcement. Several billion dollars back in the U.S. and Indiana is going to benefit from it. You have a bicycle company in Seymour, I think $12 million, made in America bicycles, made in Indiana, directly because of the tariff news. I could go on and on, but because of why is Indiana seizing on that? Because we are the crossroads of America. We have a rich manufacturing base already in this great state. And I can tell you from corner to corner, those voters in Indiana appreciate President Trump and what he's doing to put their jobs first, increase their pay. And that's how we keep those voters in our party.
You mentioned the Democratic Party and you did some traveling. So I hate to ask you to advise the National Democratic Party, but I've read several articles, Bill Maher and other like old-time liberals who are frustrated with politics, frustrated with their party, said their party's nothing but gender identity, January 6th, and whatever else they can think of. Would our country be better off if maybe both parties moved more toward the center, even though I would argue that Trump's policies, certainly economic policies, are centrist and moderate?
I would too. I mean, again.
But do you tell your colleagues or friends in politics on the other side, hey, why don't you come over? You don't have to join the Republican Party, but why don't you just work with me a little bit?
You see a few Democrats who are voices in the wilderness today who are saying exactly that our party has to get back to not being the crazy party. But again, the next generation of American politics is going to be this question: who keeps the working? Can Republicans keep the working class vote? We keep it by representing them instead of representing Wall Street and corporate interest. And Democrats are saying, how can we win them back? That's the next generation of American politics. So we have to have leaders, federal, state, and local level who are intent on representing the blue collar voters in a way that Republicans traditionally haven't done a very good job of. So that's what this all gets back to. And I think President Trump has us on a great path for Republicans to stay cemented in that direction for a long time.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies. Our guest today, United States Senator, and I'm going to ask this question because I ask this question of all public officials, right? So Senator Jim Banks, where would you be without Amanda, Lillian, Elizabeth, and Joanne?
I'm a girl dad. And now all of a sudden, my 3 daughters are teenage daughters. So, and my wife, I'm not the perfect.
Your 20th anniversary this year?
We celebrated our 20th anniversary. I was stuck in Washington, but I made up for it, and we went on a nice anniversary trip the first week that we had a recess week. She is the perfect wife, the perfect mom, but our 3 teenage daughters are, pray for me and for all of that. I mean, it is a rough and tumble time in life, but very proud of them. We live in the same small town that I grew up in, and we have a busy house. My dog Marshall, who
named after John Marshall, George
named
Marshall,
after Thomas Riley Marshall, the
former vice president,
former vice president from Indiana, who comes from Columbia City, the same small town that I do. So he keeps me. He's my guy that keeps me company in all of the chaos and drama. But my wife, as you know, when I deployed to Afghanistan, she was elected by my state senate district to go to the state house. And I forget who I was with somebody today who reminded me that she was a better state senator than I ever was. I certainly wouldn't be a United States senator if it weren't for her. She's engaged in the political battle too, and we care deeply about our conservative values, our pro-family values, and for our family, it's a family affair. It's a family effort. I mean, my daughters spent much of the last 8 years in Washington with me, and at a younger age, that we do this. We serve as a family. We understand that this is a commitment that all of us make, and very proud of them. And they're developing their own viewpoints and values as well. I'm trying to influence that as much as I can, but very, very proud of them and very proud of what our family has accomplished.
Greg Ballard, who was midway through his first term as mayor, we were in a car riding back from some speech or whatever, and he served in combat in the first Persian Gulf War, was under artillery fire. We were talking about it somehow, some way, and I said, is that the toughest thing that you've ever been through? He looked me in the eye, as serious as any time he's ever looked at me, and said, that's nothing compared to parenting a teenage daughter. At the time, my daughter was like 12 or 9, maybe. So I was getting ready to come into it. And I looked at him, I started laughing. I'm like, you can't be serious. He looked like he was getting ready to be walked to the firing squad. He looked right. He goes, no, it's very, very, very difficult. He goes, you just have to. Karen Pence told me this too. You just have to fight for them.
Ah, that's right.
They
could care less than a United States senator. I can tell you that. But raising girls in this culture and this environment is really tough. I mean, going to watching their experiences in schools, watching watching what they went through COVID and the lockdowns, and my daughters were at that prime age in public schools of They got the biggest end of the raw deal of the lockdowns and COVID. So they're a part of that. They're going to be a part of probably what years from now we'll look back as the COVID generation and the long-term effects of that, and trying to raise them in a way that give them boldness and the ability to stand up for themselves and instill in them those values more than anything else is my mission.
Is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most?
I don't know about most. I've thought about this a little bit, but one of my early political influences was Governor Bowen. I just right before I came to see you, I was with Governor Braun and stopped by to say hello to him. As you know, I replaced him in the Senate, and now he's the governor. And one cool thing about being governor is you walk into the governor's big, beautiful private office, and he's got the portraits of his favorite governors on the wall. And one of his portraits was Governor Bowen. So I got to tell Governor Braun about my unique relationship with Governor Bowen. Governor Bowen and I were in the same college fraternity at Indiana University. He was there a long time before I was. But much later in his life, when I was Delta Chi is the fraternity, I became aware that he was, as I first got interested in politics, I became aware that he was also a Delta Chi at IU. So I wrote him a letter. And at the time, I was the college Republican president at Indiana University at the same time. So I wrote Governor Braun a letter. He was retired to Bremen, Indiana, not far from where I'm from in Columbia City, just up US 30. Wrote him a letter. I'm the college Republican president, and I'm a Delta Chi. And I wonder, he had to have been well into his 70s at this point, maybe pushing 8. I don't know how old he was when he died, but I wrote him a letter, and I swear 2 or 3 days later, I get a handwritten letter back responding, yes, I would love to come and speak to the college Republicans. I would love to stop by the Delta Chi house and visit the men of Delta Chi, the students who are there, and he did. So a couple weeks later, he comes to campus. We had when I was college Republican president, we had lots of Murray Clark was state senator back then, and we had a lot of other great speakers, but my favorite was Governor Bowen, and that led to a long term in the later years of Governor Bowen's life, a long term pen pal relationship. Later I ran for, first thing I did, I ran for county council, and then I ran for state senate, and Governor Bowen would endorse me. And I don't know, man, back in Whitley County, that was a big deal. I mean, we weren't far from where he was from. It gave me some, in my late 20s, gave me a little bit of credibility as a young guy running for office, that a beloved former governor of Indiana would endorse me. It probably raised some eyebrows with a lot of people. Like, why is Governor Bowen endorsing Jim Banks for Whitley County Council? But he did it. But one of my favorite treasures, and I have it framed, and if you ever come to my Washington, D.C. office, I have it framed in my office, a handwritten note, front and back, from Governor Bowen. And I think it was when I ran for the state senate. And he wrote this, it's a long letter, his name's on the top, and Governor Bowen writes in his handwriting, cursive handwriting, I support you running for the state senate, but I really hope that you'll just keep moving up. Keep going. And for me, like for a kid where I came from, I grew up in a trailer park in a small town in northern Indiana, son of a factory worker. For him to take that kind of interest in me was special at that point in my life. So I think about Governor Bowen a lot. I mean, he was the Speaker of the State House. He was the first 2-term governor in Indiana history,
72 to 80.
And then he went and served as the Secretary of Health and Human Services for President Reagan. And then he played that senior statesman role in our state. I would go visit with him in Bremen in his basement, and he had a little bit of a wall of fame on the wall with him and famous people, but he would visit for hours over lemonade and iced tea and talk about Indiana political history, and I loved it. I wish I could go back. I wish I could have recorded it and some of those conversations, but if to answer your question, I mean, he would be top of my list.
I also thought it was really cool that Otis Bowen was Secretary Health and Human Services in '87 when IU won the national championship and got to be there when Ronald Reagan's making fun of Bobby Knight.
He was governor of Indiana for the undefeated season in 1976 as well.
That's right. Did you enjoy your time in Bloomington?
Maybe too much. I love my time. It took me, I don't brag about this, but it took me 8 years to graduate, and not with a graduate degree. I wasn't a serious student, but for me, that's where, I first in my family to go to college. I didn't know what I was getting into. I remember right before I left for Bloomington, my dad told me, he said, he goes, my parents called me Jimmy. He said, Jimmy, I don't know how we're going to pay for this. He's like, I'm sorry, but I don't think you're going to, like, weeks before I was set to go to Bloomington. I'm like, what do you mean, Dad? I'm enrolled at IU in Bloomington. I'm going. So we kind of had this back and forth. If it weren't for student loans, and
sure,
I worked the whole time I was in Bloomington. I worked at Pizza Express at the time. What do they call it now? It's something different.
I thought I still saw those not that long ago.
I worked at the Bloomington Convention Center. I had a number of odd jobs. My parents helped as much as they could, but we didn't come from a place where my parents could pay for my college. So it took me 8 years to graduate, but I got the political bug. I went and worked with Crabtree on the Hostettler campaigns. I learned a lot about politics. And
did you think about joining the military right after high school?
My brother was in the military. My brother joined the Air Force enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school. But it was something I thought in the back of my mind, it was something I had a passion for. I applied a number of times and couldn't make it. And I got to an age where I thought, like I said, if I'm going to do it, I got to do it now, because I'm going to be too old to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm going to sit back for the rest of my life and regret it. So I did it about as late as I could.
We have a few more minutes with Senator Jim Banks. Her name's been brought up in other podcasts. And so given your geographic location, I'm going to ask you, that's okay, how much do you miss Jackie Walorski?
Oh, she was a great colleague, and she was a lot of fun too. When in the House, I served in the House for 8 years, and she got there maybe 4 years before I did. She ran a couple times before she won.
Right.
She ran against she ran against Donnelly and lost, and then Donnelly opened up the seat, and then she won it 2 years later. So we knew each other because her time in the State House.
That's right.
We had similar values, but we had so much fun. Susan Brooks, Larry Bouchon, Walorski, and I would always sit together on the floor, and it was just there were fun moments, special. We talk about what was going on back home, talk about our families, and joke about some of the more colorful people in Indiana politics. And
we have our share.
I'll never forget the shocking phone call I got where I was and what I was doing when Kevin McCarthy called me and told me that he found out about it first and called to let me know. And I just for a few hours it hadn't hit the news yet, and I thought, well, this can't be true. And of course it was. And our districts were right next to each other, so Jackie and I had this thing where we didn't want to surprise each other because we shared Kosciuszko County, which was very, very Republican county, important in her district, important in my district. And we would talk often about how we were going to vote before we voted. And sometimes we would change each other's minds.
Right.
So you bring her up and brings back a lot of memories and a lot of emotions, because she was truly one of the best. I was at her funeral, and so powerful. All of the colleagues from across the country who came out for it, because she was loved by everybody in Washington. She was larger than life. She was a big, tall lady.
Yes, she was.
Big lady. Very intimidating, but she was respected by people on both sides. And I gave her eulogy on the House floor after she passed away. And one of the more powerful moments of my time in the House was giving that speech and trying to be put together and deliver it without breaking down. But there were a lot of emotions when we lost her. A big loss for our state. I will say, Rudy Yakim is a rock star.
I don't know him.
he is the bright up and comer in the House for Indiana. One thing that we've lacked in Indiana politics are long-term House members who rise up and become committee chairs, and he's going to be one of those guys. He's going to be chair of a committee or in lead. Erin Houchin's another one. Erin Houchin is cream of the crop for Indiana. She's going to be a leader for our state.
She is
for a long time. Dynamic.
She is so great.
So, but Rudy took Jackie's place. He was a part of Jackie's team, and I think he's honored her in a big way in the way that he's approached the same job, and I think we can be very proud for that.
Representative Houchin and I had the exact same job 25 years ago. She was the executive assistant to Connie Noss. And she left, and I took the gig. So every time I see her, we always chuckle about it. Speaking of somebody, legit, down to earth, cool, approachable, fun to talk to or talk with. I hope she's someone else who keeps rising.
Yeah, she will.
2 final questions before we get to the 5 questions. One is, if you could make a difference in one particular issue in D.C., I know you've got all these armed services and technology, AI, all these things that you talk about, but if you could come back to the state party Lincoln Day or the state party thing and say, I have just got done making a difference and this is going to change for the better, what would this be?
It's got to be the debt. I mean, 33 trillion and counting in debt. That's COVID. The debt was rising before COVID, but COVID sent it in a spiraling direction. We now spend more in interest, paying interest on our national debt than we pay for the entire budget of the Pentagon, which is nearing. It's going to be $1 trillion. We're going to be spending $1 trillion on defense budgets. So you think about all of the schools that you could build, the roads that you could build, the teachers that you could hire, the innovation that you could invest in with $1 trillion every single year. And instead we're paying it just on the interest of our national debt. It's one of the reasons that I've voted against all of these omnibus and spending bills in Washington. And for the most part it's just continuing to kick, when both sides do it, kick the can down the road, and kind of the way you got to change the process, the way the appropriations and spending process. Right now we are, for the first time ever, in a full 1 year long continuing resolution. So it's a broken process, and something that a lot of us in Washington spent a lot of time talking about. And with President Trump, I think we have an opportunity to advance some reforms as we approach the end of this fiscal year. The fiscal year starts on October 1st. So when we get into August and September and we're having this conversation again, it'll be an opportunity to make some serious reforms that are much needed to bring that picture down. President Trump's committed to it. He and I have talked personally about it a number of times. I chaired the largest conservative caucus in the House, the Republican Study Committee, which is really focused on spending and the debt and budget reforms, and had an opportunity to present a lot of those reforms to President Trump in the first term. And I think at this point, he's keenly aware that we have to do something about it and focused on it, and something that between now and September, we have to have some serious conversations about.
You went viral a few weeks ago when you were accosted, and I'm going to use that verb. Do you sometimes wish that you were a public official at the senatorial level and there was no social media?
Before social media? I don't know. I mean, on one hand, it's never been easier to communicate with your elected official at the local, state, or federal level than it is today with, that direct contact with social media. Social media is also, I think, broken down just like a podcast does. Broken down the more biased aspect of mainstream media. That you can go directly to a source and learn from them rather than being filtered by someone with an ideological lens in a mainstream media outlet. So I don't bemoan it. You caught a real moment of me in an elevator with who I would call an activist on Capitol Hill, which is actually a frequent occurrence, and I'm not complaining about it. He had a right to be in the Senate office buildings. He chased me with a camera. He felt that he was wrongly denied his federal job. My retort to that is no one is entitled to a government funded job. I mean, that's a privilege. That's why it's public service. And no one is especially entitled to a taxpayer funded job if it's a job that wastes money. I mean, in this case, this guy made something like $100,000 a year in a job that was determined to be unneeded, and he's not entitled to that job. If the new administration, by the way, which has a mandate, winning the popular vote, President Trump, the Doge effort eliminates jobs that they believe are wasteful. This guy's not entitled to have that job. So
any more than you're entitled to your Senate seat.
Right. I put my name on the ballot. I'm elected by the people. In my case, got more votes than any candidate for the Senate in Indiana's ever got before, because Hoosiers want me to go to Washington and shake it up. I mean, they're looking at the debt picture, 37, I think I said 33, but $37 trillion in national debt.
That's right.
Means that you have to cut wasteful spending. And who said it? You'll be surprised by how much government you'll never miss. A famous Mitch Daniels line. I mean, and he slashed the state budget in that way. It's the same approach that we need at the federal level. So when I responded to this moment that became viral with this former federal government worker, my reaction was cemented from a place of not having any tolerance or patience for him when I'm thinking about my dad, who worked in a factory and paid taxes, who never made half as much as what this guy made for this job that was determined to be wasteful. Police officers, restaurant workers, teachers who are working hard for a job that might make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, and they're paying taxes to the federal government. This guy's not entitled to waste that money. I mean, this guy's not entitled to have a job that spends those taxpayers' dollars in a way that's unneeded. So, if anything, it was a raw moment of expressing that impatience for someone who, and I don't know this is a fact. I think we'll find out soon enough. These former so-called fired federal workers because of the Doge effort. I mean, they're probably being paid by, this is common. They're probably being paid by some left-wing group to go and be antagonizing on Capitol Hill and be provocateurs and chase senators around and try to get their own viral moment. And I think that's probably what you saw.
We've reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Crabtree, you want to get in on these questions? Now he has to come back on the podcast.
He'd be so good.
What was your first job?
When I was 13 years old, I went to work for a hot dog stand in Columbia City, drive-in hot dog stand. And it was owned and run by a buddy of my grandpa and my dad who worked in the same Dana factory. His name is he's still alive, Jack Hinman. And it was a summer job. I ended up working there my whole time in high school. I think when I came back from college, I worked there for a summer or two. When I came back, the best part of the job is I was back in the back making the hot dogs and running the deep fryer, but the car hops were the local cheerleaders. So it was a popular place to work, and I learned it. I loved it. I learned, even though I smelled like Coney dogs at the end of every night, I can still smell that stench of onions on my tennis shoes. And I mean, if I think about working there, but you know, I learned about hard work, working probably minimum wage at that point, and the value of hard work. That's something my dad taught me, and it was a lot. It was a job with a lot of fun. I worked at Arby's after that too in Columbia City, and those are jobs that teach you about work and how to work hard, and you learn a lot from that.
What was your
people?
Working customer service.
Yeah, customer service, working with people.
What was your first concert?
I was thinking about this. I mean, when I was in my youth group in high school, it's probably like the Newsboys or Petra or some
Who?
Christian band.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But I think it was probably something like that. The first concert that I can remember though was the Smashing Pumpkins. By the way, I love concerts. I go to a lot of them.
Oh, you do? Really?
I do. I love live music. Something about me that only a few people know. I think my first big concert in Fort Wayne was the Smashing Pumpkins. That's a big difference from the Christian concerts, right? Smashing Pumpkins. I can remember going to see them at the Fort Wayne, with the Memorial Coliseum. My favorite band, if I could take a minute on
Sure.
this, because this is important to me. My favorite band is the Counting Crows. I'm a child of the 90s.
All right.
Mr. Jones, my favorite song. I've seen the Counting Crows over 30 times from what I can count. And one name that a lot of your listeners might know is Angel Rivera.
Oh, yeah.
Who was a buddy of mine, a college Republican buddy of mine from Puerto Rico. We met in
one of the most liked people I've ever met.
He briefly served on the city council in Indianapolis. Right. He now lives in Dallas, Texas. He's to this day, he's my concert buddy. So we've gone to a lot of Counting Crows concerts together. A few years ago, he and I saw Bruce on Broadway, which was one of the highlights of my life, to go see Bruce Springsteen on Broadway. It's now a Netflix show, and I recommend it because it's a beautiful tribute. It's a emotion. Bruce Springsteen, the greatest of our songwriter and musician of our lifetime, I believe, and hear him tell stories and sing songs in between. And so those are some memorable moments. I also saw REM in Denver. I took my wife, who is arguably 5'1", and it was in a general admission standing room only, very tight, small venue right before REM broke up. And my wife hated it because she was short and she couldn't see over people. So she wanted to leave early. And I'm like, my God, this is a historic moment. REM and another great band. I've seen Bruce Springsteen a few times. I love the Counting Crows, but as they get older, they keep putting out new music that I want to like, but I don't like it as much as their old music. But these days, the Killers, I saw the Killers a couple times in the last year, and they put on a hell of a show. But one of the best shows I've ever seen was last July at the Ryman Auditorium. And now you got me going. The Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, front row for the Bleachers. I don't know if you know the Bleachers, but they are a great live band. One of the best shows I've ever seen. I can't wait to go back to see them sometime. And hopefully they come to Indianapolis and I get a chance to see them too. So I love concerts. I'm not sure what my first concert was, but I've seen a lot since.
You still call it Deer Creek, correct?
Yeah, I do. But I haven't gone back there very often. You know, I saw the Counting Crows most recently. Eric Tobias has done this thing up at what is that park up in north side of Indy?
The Rock at the Ruins.
Rock at the Ruins. He had a 2-night. Do you know Eric Tobias? I don't know him either, but I follow him on social media. He put this together, this Rock the Ruins, and the Counting Crows came and played back to back. It was my birthday a couple summers ago. Back to back shows. It was an incredible venue for a band like that. And then before that, I saw Counting Crows right here at White River, which is another great outdoor venue too. So we're blessed in Indiana with some great music venues.
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
I read a lot. Every year I post the books that I read for the previous year on Instagram around New Year's, and I compete with myself. I think I read over 30 books the last couple of years. So this is my outlet. I'm a little bit introverted, so the way that I dial it back and recharge myself is to read. I'm on the airplanes a lot, so I read a lot in the airports or on airplanes.
And you've been on my brother's airplane as he flies Republic.
Oh yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Todd Young's been on it. Greg Pence has been on it. I'm like, look for the 6'4", 300-pound guy who
looks
trying
like you.
Until we were side by side and you'd think that one of us was adopted and it ain't him.
Well, they say that fiction builds empathy, and I need to read more fiction apparently. But I read a lot of biographies, and last year I read a John Quincy Adams biography.
Randall Woods,
a great one of the presidents who doesn't get enough credit, but also someone with there for the founding, son of a president, diplomat, Secretary of State, did incredible things, becomes the president for 4 years, and then had enough humility to come back and serve in the House of Representatives. And it was one of the chief fighters against slavery in the House. And one thing I love to do when people come to Washington, I tour them around the Capitol, take them to Statuary Hall, and you can see in Statuary Hall, which is the original House chamber, where the former presidents who served there, where their desks were.
Mm.
And you can go right on the statuary hall, the House floor, and stand right where John Quincy Adams was a House member and where he would speak out against, those big debates over slavery. Abraham Lincoln's desk was in the back. He was a backbencher way in the back of the chamber. You can see the plate where his desk was too. So a great historical figure, former president that doesn't get enough credit, that had a big impact on our country. So that I spent a lot of my time reading. As far as book recommendations go, I perhaps have many, but go find my Instagram page and you can see what I've read every year. I post it every year and make a lot of recommendations.
And I think I asked you earlier, do you listen to podcasts much?
I don't, except for yours.
Well, the author of that book on John Quincy Adams came on my podcast.
Well, there you go.
And he was Randall Woods. I'll email you the list of all.
There aren't a lot.
Podcasts.
I mean, aside from his, there aren't a lot of great John Quincy Adams biographies. I was always struck by that.
No, because he's so overshadowed by Jackson, and I've had a former congressman came on. Remember Christopher Cox?
Yeah, I just read his book.
He was on my podcast to talk about that. I'll send you the list. I've tons. I'm very lucky. I've had these amazing historians on. I know you're a history buff.
Cox's book on Wilson is the first book that I finished this year, so that'll be on my stack at the end of the year. I a lot of interest in that era, but Thomas Riley Marshall, my hometown, former Indiana governor and then vice president, was vice president to Woodrow Wilson. It's not a flattering book about Wilson or Marshall or that administration. And I don't know that I've ever met Chris Cox in person, but at some point I want to sit down with him and have a longer conversation about that.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
There's so much. I mean, we just got through Easter, so the resurrection has to be the top of my list. I mean, to actually see it, to be there and witness that as a Christian. If you think of historical moments, that has to be it. I do have a sense though that we are. I feel this every single day when I go to work and when I go to Washington, that we're living through great history. I mean, I'm optimistic about America and our country and the role that we play in the world, and so I'm grateful that we live in a time like what we do and have a sense that we're making history at the moment.
If you could, this is a somewhat difficult question for you because senators and governors and celebrities, like they've had lunch or dinner with, either their heroes or really, famous or important people. But if you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose?
It's a dangerous question because when you meet people that you admire, they end up being total pricks. And to spend 2 hours with someone that you put on a pedestal and then he'd be disappointed or whatnot. It's got to be Michael Jordan. I mean, is there anybody who's ever done anything that was as elite and the very best at what they did more than Michael Jordan? I can't think of it.
That's a great answer. And I'll be candid. I don't know. This is my 310th interview. I don't know if we've had Jordan as an answer. If we have, it doesn't stick out. But that's a terrific.
Yeah, I'm a child of the 90s, and I mean he was the very elite. I mean, I know there's debates about whether or not LeBron or Michael Jordan were the greatest. There's no question about it. He was the greatest at what he did ever, and I can't think of anyone who was more dominant, that had that the killer instinct that he did, that was that much of a competitor and changed the game of basketball more than what he did. So lots of people I could come up with who are long gone that I'd love to have dinner with, but as far as living people go, he'd be the top of my list.
I ask one question that I didn't ask earlier that I'd like to, and it'd be a short answer because I know our time is coming to an end. Both as an elected official here in Indiana, serving in Indiana, and a United States Senator elected in Indiana, serving in D.C., sometimes you have to tell your governor or your president no. How do you do it?
Well, I've served. I got to Washington with President Trump for the first 4 years of the Trump term, and then I served for 4 years under Biden, and now in the new Trump term. One thing, the personal side of President Trump, I've spent a lot of time with them, and President Trump has been very, very supportive me over the years, and I've had incredible experiences with President Trump, riding in the limo with him, being with him one-on-one, and having dinner with him. He's incredibly engaging. And one thing about him that a lot of people, the part of President Trump that a lot of people miss and don't see is President Trump asking me for, what do you think about this? What do you think about that person? What do you think about this legislation? He, like I said before, he never stops. He's always engaging and talking. When I reach out to President Trump, he always takes my phone call. He always wants to talk and engage, and he wants the perspective of what's going on in the real world. And he loves it. By the way, he loves Indiana. I mean, he attributes his win in 2016 to winning the primary in Indiana. That's when he became the Republican nominee, and Indiana's been very good to him. So he's always asking me about what do people in Indiana think about this? How do they feel about that? And tell the good people of Indiana that I love them and I appreciate them. So to answer your question, it's very easy to give President Trump my perspective. And I've found over the last 9 years of knowing him, and I got to know him better after he left office. We spent a lot of time together at Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster, and had lots of conversations about him running again and what another Trump term would look like. We talk a lot about policy, and we were aligned on the big issues of the day. So there are a few disagreements, but I find him to be very engaging and wants to hear from leaders about how they feel, and takes. I've seen him banter back and forth with people who he disagrees with in an incredibly respectful way. And at the end of the day, he's a deal maker. He wants to find common ground and get things done. And that's what I appreciate about him.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise and federally certified veteran-owned business. Our guest today, I skipped a part, which is very important, and I know Crabtree will love this part because I know how much he loved him. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister, the best. I got to work with Chris when P.E. got to Sachem, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Talk about a legend.
Oh, Indianapolis isn't Indianapolis without P.E. McAllister. He's the greatest Hoosier I ever met, for sure. Our guest today, United States Senator Jim Banks. He's dedicated a life to public service, including military service. He's a winner, and he's fighting for Hoosiers out in Washington, D.C., and that's really all we can ask for. I know it's not always easy, but thank you for coming on the Leaders and Legends podcast. I know you're busy.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
May I ask one quick favor? Tell Marty Obst to quit big timing me and come on the podcast.
I'll order him. I'll be happy to order him. You got to be tough on him, though. Tough questions.
Thank you, Senator.
You got it. That was fun.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.